This presentation will be over the disease diphtheria. For the Christian worldview aspect of this presentation, I chose the Bible verse Leviticus 5:3, which states, "If he touches human uncleanliness of whatever sort the uncleanliness may be with which on becomes unclean, and it is hidden from him when he comes to know it and realizes his guilt." Some common signs and symptoms of this disease relate to the fact that it is an upper respiratory infection. In other words, it affects the nasal passages and the throat. These symptoms include sore throat, swollen glands, coughing and sneezing, and fever. Some of the pathogenic aspects of the disease also causes a formation of pseudomembrane, which leads to a difficulty swallowing and breathing and an increased fatigue. Due to the nature of this virus and some of the signs and symptoms of it, it sometimes goes undiagnosed, and unless treatment is immediately sought, it can lead to complications and other diseases, including blood sepsis, which leads to organ failure and toxic shock, cardiovascular disease, which creates the symptoms of hypotension, bradycardia and edema, neurological damage, which leads to paresthesia, fatigue, and bradykinesia, and kidney damage, which can also lead to toxic shock and an accumulation of toxins and waste in the body. The causative agent of this specific disease is Corynebacterium diphtheriae. It is a gram-positive bacterium, which in other words, when a gram stain is performed on this specific bacteria, it will be positive for a violet color, meaning that it has peptoglycan in its cell wall that is retaining the stain. This specific bacterium has a very unique morphology in the fact that it is rod-shaped like other bacterium, but it has a club shape at the end of each portion of the rod, which is a like circular square kind of a shape, and it also has a almost V or bowl shape within the center of the rod. The pathogenesis in this membrane relates primarily to the fact that it relies on the toxins that it releases in order to destroy the tissues and other cells that are in the body. The reason why this is so important is because it makes the cells have an inability to perform cellular protein synthesis. And one of the prime products of cellular protein synthesis is adenine diphosphate, also known as ADP, which is a prime component in the creation of ATP and glycolysis process, which is important because both of these create products that are very important to the cells getting the necessary energy that they need in order to function properly and be able to grow and multiply. After these toxins have destroyed the cells and their tissues, the cells will accumulate, causing a thick gray coating to form on some of the still healthy tissues, primarily in the throat and the upper nasal passages. This accumulation of the dead cells is known as the pseudomembrane, which, like I mentioned in the signs and symptoms, causes a difficulty of swallowing and of breathing. This disease also has, or this bacterium, also has a low mobility rate. In other words, it cannot move on its own, so it relies on the fluid found in the mucous membranes in order to travel throughout the body and eventually make its way into the bloodstream to cause other complications and diseases. The epidemiology of this specific disease is that it comes from the strain of Corynebacterium that causes diphtheria and only infects humans. Its primary mode of spread and transmission is through respiratory droplets. So sneezing and coughing and sharing of bodily fluids like saliva are all prime ways that this disease can spread and multiply and cause more infected cases. It's also possible if a person were to sneeze or their bodily fluids somehow get on surfaces and those get infected with this disease and the bacterium, then it can further lead to more spread of it as well. Contaminated food and drink is also possible, especially in third world countries where diphtheria is not something commonly vaccinated for and is more prevalent throughout the population. Close contact with somebody who has been infected with diphtheria is also another prime way to be able to obtain this disease. Some of the prime ways of treating this specific disease of diphtheria is through antibiotics, just because it is an antimicrobial and it's treating bacteria, which is a microbe. Penicillin, ampicillin, and benzylpenicillin are three mildly strong antibiotics that are usually used first in children, whereas erythromycin, azithromycin, and clarithromycin are the primary means of treatment in adults. And with adults, their cases tend to be more severe, so a combination of one of the last three drugs with one of the first three drugs is not uncommon to try and help to be able to cure and treat them as well as possible. With prevention of this disease, the primary mode is obviously vaccination. Most children in the United States are vaccinated with a shot called Tdap, which includes vaccinations for the diseases tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis, which is also known as whooping cough, and it is also kept up to date throughout the years. As people get older, usually around 12 years old, they will get a booster, and then about every 10 years after that. A great way to prevent the spread of this disease and try to control it as best as possible is to not go to foreign countries where there is a higher prevalence of this disease without being boosted with another Tdap shot, and also just avoiding close contact with people who have diphtheria or places where there might be a contamination of food or drinks, because vaccinations are not always a promise that you will not obtain the disease. For this aspect of this virus or this bacterial infection, just like any other thing in the world, God is obviously so prevalent, in the Bible verse of Leviticus 5:3 that I had mentioned on the very first slide of the title slide, is just a warning basically from God of Him telling us to stray away from uncleanliness, stray away from places where we know that we could get disease or infection of some kind, and diphtheria is no exception. The main reason that He tries to warn us through this verse of things that are unseen, because we cannot always see microbes with the naked eye, is because of how much He loves us and wants to protect us. Not only us as individuals, but those around us. And therefore, this warning should be taken on a personal level of us seeing that we need to take precautions of disinfecting surfaces, staying up to date on our vaccinations, avoiding travel to foreign places where diphtheria has a very high prevalence, in order to protect ourselves, but also protect our friends and family and all those that we may come in contact with, because this is a very serious disease with very serious complications and consequences and symptoms. And this is just the references that I used in order to create this presentation. Thank you for watching this video.